A beautiful evening to you, ladies and gentlemen, viewers of My Media Prime Television, the African Eye. Good evening and thanks for joining us for this special edition of 90 Minutes in Africa, coming to you from My Media Prime, the African Eye. In today's edition of 90 Minutes in Africa, we are going to be discussing the issues in the English-speaking part of Cameroon, as well as Cameroon also in general, with an exclusive interview with Ambassador Tibor Nagy, who is the former Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, the U.S. former Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, who has accepted to grant us this exclusive interview, which will be done in a fair, neutral, and very objective manner. I want to thank the management of My Media Prime. I want to thank the Department of Programs. I want to thank Kumulionet, the coordinator, and the General Manager, Brian Tambe, for making it possible for us to run this special interview, not forgetting our special team of producers who are the technical board. Ambassador Tibor Nagy, thank you so much, sir, for accepting to give an exclusive interview to My Media Prime, the African Eye.
Thanks so much for having me, Boh. It's great to be on your show.
Ambassador Tibor Nagy, you are coming on this program. This is 90 Minutes in Africa, one of the most watched TV shows in Africa, and also one of the most watched television channels. My Media Prime, one of the most watched television channels in the English-speaking part of Cameroon and also across Africa. Today we want to talk about the issues in Cameroon. That will be in the first part of our discussion. Because subsequently we are going to be talking about African affairs. But today we are paying particular interest on Cameroon. Ambassador Tibor Nagy, we want to talk about the war in the English-speaking part of Cameroon. Did you see this war coming? Was it predictable?
Unfortunately, it was. I have to say that, when the problem started, we know the problem started a long time ago, because Anglophone Cameroonians never were given an equal status in Cameroon to the Francophone Cameroonians. So, this was obviously and very unfortunately clear even when I was there as the deputy ambassador back in the early 90s. It was a very serious situation. And then when the central government did some of the things that they did that led to the demonstrations, the initial very peaceful and civil demonstrations in 2016, and their response to it, I fear that somebody looking at the situation from outside, it seemed very logical that this was going to have a very bad turnout. And unfortunately, as the situation has progressed, there have been many places where it could have been stopped, where the Cameroonian government could have taken some enlightened measures to just address the complaints of the population, but they never have to this point. And those of us who were watching the situation predicted, and unfortunately we proved to be correct, that it would get worse and worse and worse and more violent and more violent and more violent. So we are at the stage where it's getting harder and harder to come to some kind of an accommodation, and that really is a tragedy.
Ambassador Tibor Nagy, you had said in the past that a military solution would not be possible as far as this war is concerned. Do you still stand by that position?
I do. Research nowadays shows that civil wars these days can last anywhere from 10 to 20 years, which is really tragic. And we have seen examples from the past where you might have overwhelming military force on one side, but the spirit of the people just does not give up. It goes on and on and on. And finally, the people wielding the military force are fatigued, they stop, they go away, they run out of solutions. We can go back, frankly, to the American War of Independence against Great Britain, and then, we can talk about Vietnam, of course, and most recently we can talk about Afghanistan. You had the greatest military power in the world, the United States of America, working with an Afghan government that was well supplied, well armed. And at the end of the day, look who wins. The same thing with Vietnam. So as long as you have a population that is dedicated to a certain cause, then another military force coming from, another part of the country, it can win battles, but as history has shown, it seems like it will not win the war.
Ambassador Tibor Nagy, in the ongoing fighting in the northwest and southwest regions of Cameroon, thousands have been killed, millions have been displaced, and those in these regions continue to bear the brunt of imposed ghost towns and timid school turnout, trauma, as well as a morbid economy. How much more will they wait for peace to return while the international community appears to be looking away?
Yeah, in these kind of civil wars, we know that who suffers the most. It's always it's the most innocent that are the victims, of intimidation, murder, rape, the most horrible things. And you're right, the international community is not focused on Cameroon. It seems like, the struggle in Cameroon has been going on and on and on, and we have the deaths, we have the ghost towns, we have the secessionists who also have been, extremely brutal. But the world looks at these major wave events which come up, and the most recent obviously being the war in Ukraine. And I recognize that is very unjust. It's not fair, but we have to look at the situation. We have to accept reality, and we just have to deal with the world the way it is, not how we want it to be.
Your Excellency, you are very active on social media. Of course, we read your posts with a lot of delight, especially on Twitter. You've granted interviews as well as made wide-ranging diplomatic interventions. One would surmise from the above that you have a soft spot for Cameroon as well as its English-speaking community. We know you are former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, but why are you so concerned about Cameroon's current predicament?
Well, part of that is exactly because of what I said just before, that the world seems not at all focused, or even, I hate to use the word interested, because that's not a very nice word to use, but the world just does not seem interested in what's going on in Cameroon. And the cause of the Anglophones, on the one hand, is absolutely just. The mechanisms that are being used by both sides are absolutely unjust. And I guess the most frustrating thing is that at one point at least, it would not have taken that much on the part of the Cameroonian government if they had been serious about addressing the root causes of these issues to have ended it. But instead, because of, I have to say, it was bad faith, that they tried symbolic measures to end the problems. And as a result, hundreds of thousands have suffered, thousands have died, and the misery goes on and on and on.
Your Excellency, I was trying to do research for this exclusive interview, and here's an excerpt of a story that was published on the online platform, The Intercept. Of course, I'm going to send you a link to the story at the end of this program so that you can read more. I quote, that is according to the story on The Intercept, which is published a few days back. Months after, I quote, quotes open, months after the head of the U.S. Africa Command announced that funding for Cameroon's armed forces will be slashed due to human rights concerns, the Pentagon continued employing members of an elite Cameroonian military unit long known for committing atrocities, including extrajudicial killings as proxies through a classified special operations counterterrorism program. End of quote. So, Your Excellency, going by this, is it safe to say that the United States, I want to first of all know whether you are aware of this, this report, and is it safe to say that the United States has joined Cameroon in the war against Anglophone self-determination?
I think that is a huge misreading of the facts. I can only speak, obviously, of what we were doing when I was Assistant Secretary of State, because, I'm no longer privy to the to the select information on what might be going on today. But fundamentally, the cooperation with Cameroon involved counterterrorism operations in the far north. And the United States of America undertook training of Cameroonian units that were involved in the fight against the terrorist organizations around Lake Chad and then along the Nigerian border, basically Boko Haram and ISIS West Africa. Even during my time, we received evidence that some members of one of the units that we were working with had been involved in human rights violations in the Anglophone region. And immediately thereafter, we stopped any kind of relationship with that military unit. Those rules remain very much in effect. They're not specific to Cameroon. They are specific to U.S. military training conducted around the world. In addition to the Pentagon leadership, the military training is reviewed very, very carefully by members of Congress. And I can tell you from my own experience how doggedly interested members of Congress are to make absolutely sure that the United States military does not cooperate with international military units who are guilty of human rights violations. There are numbers of reports, there are hearings. So I can only speak for my time as Assistant Secretary of State, but knowing how the U.S. government follows these kinds of things, I think it's ridiculous to say that the United States of America is supporting Cameroonian government's operations in the Anglophone conflict.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. At the end of the show, I'm going to send you the link to the story. I was quoting an excerpt of a story written by a foreign newspaper, The Intercept. In the same light, His Excellency Tibor Nagy, the United States and other Western countries are sort of safe havens for leaders of what has come to be known as the struggle. Is this direct or covert support by the U.S. and other Western powers of the separatist community?
No. As I said several times publicly when I was Assistant Secretary of State, and I'm sure, again, I can't speak for the U.S. government anymore, but the U.S. policy was at that time, and I suspect it's still the same policy, to support a united Cameroon, a single Cameroonian state. At the same time, the United States of America was extremely concerned with human rights violations, the treatment of Anglophone citizens as second-class citizens, and on. We engaged with a number of international partners on that. I worked very hard to try to set up a contact group. Unfortunately, there was one key international partner that was not interested in participating in the contact group. But no, the United States is not supporting separatism. The United States is supporting the fair treatment of all Cameroonian citizens. The United States is supporting ending human rights violations. But it's certainly not supporting the secession of Ambazonia from Cameroon.
So, Your Excellency, if I can get you right and very clearly, you are saying that the United States of America stands for one and indivisible Cameroon, as well as the United States of America is against any form of self-determination by the English-speaking community of Cameroon.
Okay, that's some clever wording there. I think you can say that the United States policy, at least during my time as Assistant Secretary, was to support a united Cameroon. Now, I cannot say that the United States would be against self-determination, because you know that historically the United States has been in favor of self-determination. Very interesting, I come to this interview from a conference this morning of American Somaliland Conference, and we all know the situation of Somaliland. In some respects, it's similar to the situation of Anglophone Cameroon. The big difference, of course, being is that Somaliland is a de facto state exercising its own functions, even though it has not been recognized by any country aside from Taiwan. So the Somalilanders are working very actively to change American policy, which has traditionally been towards Somalia as it is towards Cameroon. The U.S. has favored a one Somalia policy, but the Somalilanders are very actively working to try to get the United States to revise that. So U.S. policies can be changed because the United States tends to look sympathetically on movements for self-determination.
Are you saying that at one point in time, the United States of America could tend to support the state of Ambazonia? At one point in time, that policy of supporting one and indivisible Cameroon could change at what point in time?
Absolutely. American policies can change based on circumstances. You know, a country like the United States cannot have absolutely static policies because the world changes dramatically. So as conditions on the ground change, obviously U.S. policies change as well.
Okay, let's now talk about what has been described by many here in Cameroon as some sort of international media hypocrisy and justice on the war in the ongoing war in the English-speaking part of Cameroon. We have seen the international media, CNN and other international media, the BBC, talk about the ongoing Russian war against Ukraine with mobilization across the globe. Yet, the Anglophone war doesn't seem to be of interest in the Western media, despite the loss of thousands of lives in both camps, as well as the loss of lives among civilians. Can you help us understand this media injustice?
Yeah, absolutely. The media decides what the media is going to report on. And the struggle in Anglophone Cameroon, we can call it Anglophone Cameroon, Southern Cameroons, Ambazonia, whatever you want to call it, has been out of sight of the media. It's individual acts of horror that take place day after day after day, and it impacts a community in the United States that is not what I would call in the mainstream of media interest. You know, again, as I told you before, I like to talk about reality. I like to talk about the world as it is, not how it should be or, you know, what we believe would be just. Unfortunately, the world is that way. When you have a major event in Europe, like Russia invading Ukraine, I think the second largest and the second most populous country in Europe, then that's going to push everything else out of the way in the newspaper columns and on television. That is just how the way the world works. Even within Africa, you have a number of these conflicts going on, which deserve so much more attention, but they don't get it. I mean, if you want to look at a conflict that has taken incredible number of lives, all you have to do is look at the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo. And yet, what reporting is there on Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo? For a while, we had the news media focusing on the Tigrayan war in Ethiopia, but even that has fallen by the wayside. Right across the continent in Somalia, we have a situation where there is suffering, at least on the scale of what's going on in Anglophone Cameroon. And yet, aside from a small, columns in BBC or on the inside pages of newspapers, we just don't see much reporting on that. So we can all agree that it's highly unfair, it's unjust, but that's just how it works.
Okay, thank you so much. If you're just joining us, ladies and gentlemen, you're watching a special edition of 90 Minutes in Africa, coming to you from my Media Prime, the African Eye. We are having an exclusive interview with Ambassador Tibor Nagy, the former Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs in the United States. Of course, feel free to send us some questions. Those who are watching us from the English-speaking part of Cameroon or wherever, you can watch us on Emos. Those who are watching us, you can watch us on Emos 19. You can watch us on Canal Sat channel 309. You can watch us on YouTube BT Media Group, and you can also watch us on Facebook using My Media Prime TV. You can like and share, and also just drop any question you have for Ambassador Tibor Nagy on the comment section, and we are going to read it out for him to give answers if there is anything that is disturbing you. And those that are watching us from the two English-speaking parts of Cameroon, if you have any question, or those that are watching us also from the French-speaking parts of Cameroon, you can send your questions through SMS or through WhatsApp using the number you find on your screen. And I'm going to, whether in English or French, and I'm going to translate them and read out the questions to Ambassador Tibor Nagy. Ambassador, you are still with us. Let's now talk about President Paul Biya, who has vowed to defend the territorial integrity of Cameroon to the last boot on the ground, while at the same time the Ambazonians say they will not relent their efforts until they reach Buea. Monthly press releases from the United States and other governments across the globe calling for restraint. We call for restraint. We call for meaningful dialogue without preconditions. Those are the kind of messages we find each time there is a happening, and people are already tired about this kind of messages. But these messages have been falling on deaf ears. How can the United States accompany the Cameroon government in the peaceful resolution of the ongoing war in the English-speaking part of Cameroon?
Yeah, that also is a great question, because the answer is it cannot. All the United States of America can do, we can urge, we can apply sanctions, we can cut our cooperation, but at the end of the day, that's what it's going to be limited to. We can also strongly urge our allies and other countries that we work with to do the same. But, to get a sovereign nation to move in a certain direction, the means are limited. In this world of the current century, we just don't have the types of things where once the big country puts soldiers on a plane and drops in on the smaller country and makes them follow what the big country wants to do. We're seeing an example of that right now in Russia and Ukraine, and we're seeing how strongly much of the world is uniting against Russia, and how one of the strongest militaries in the world has run into a roadblock. So, that world has changed. So the means of persuading one country to do something are much, much more limited than they used to be.
Ambassador Tibor Nagy, let me read out the content of a tweet. You tweeted on March 8th, you said, I quote, "Whatever direction Ambazonians decide to pursue, one certainty is the current status is unacceptable to 100% of Southern Cameroonians. Even the Cameroon government," he wrote the Cam, but I'm sure it meant the Cameroon government, "even the Cameroon government must see this. Only question, when will change come, and how much more suffering?" This is the same question the civilian population in Cameroon are asking you, Ambassador Tibor Nagy. When will change come, and how much more suffering?
Yeah, and that's exactly why I asked that question. I forgot what happened when I sent that, but I know it was something that happened that continues to be tremendously frustrating, because we all know that the current status that the Anglophone region is in cannot continue like that. So the question is, the Cameroonian government obviously knows that. Will the Cameroonian government take steps now to change the situation in a way that would be acceptable to most of the Anglophone population? Or is it going to have to wait until there's a change in the Cameroonian government? President Biya has been there now for 39 years, and it's obvious that he's not going to be there forever. So are things going to change before he leaves the scene? Are things going to change after he leaves the scene? Is it going to take even longer than that? We're at a point where what we call the status quo cannot remain. And there's a law in physics that if something cannot go on, then it will stop. So the question is, when will that stop? How will it stop? And that leads to another one of my frustrations, is I don't think anybody outside of Cameroon is absolutely certain as to exactly what the Anglophone population wants.
Ambassador Tibor Nagy, how clean are the hands of the United States government in the ongoing war in the English-speaking part of Cameroon? I am asking you this question because I presume you are aware that some observers and analysts in Cameroon believe the deep state is pulling the strings from the background.
Tell me the deep state where? The deep state in Cameroon or the deep state in the United States?
The deep state in the United States.
Yeah, okay. I hate to tell my brothers and sisters who are Cameroon analysts in Cameroon, but if there is a deep state in the United States, the last issue it would care about would be Cameroon. You know, again, let's talk reality. In the United States and Washington, the community that follows events in Africa is very, very small. We don't see ourselves as Republicans. We don't see ourselves as Democrats. We see ourselves as Africanists. We're passionately interested in Africa. And everybody in that community wants the same outcome for Africa. Our differences are in how to get there, but basically we all want a stable, peaceful, prosperous Africa that's fully integrated into the international political and economic systems, that is much more democratic and looks after the growing youth population that is emerging in Africa during the present century. So, you know, I'm sorry, when you want to look in the shadows and look at all kinds of hidden, you know, paranoid dangers, then you're chasing monsters where there's no monsters in existence. As I said, if there was a deep state, they would be interested in so many other things than what's going on in Cameroon.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Let me begin to bring some questions that have been asked by viewers. Dr. Wesley Angoni has just sent a question for you. Ambassador Tibor, what role do you think the local media can play in a war like this? That's a question coming in from Dr. Wesley Angoni, Tiku.
I lost you a little bit of there. So the question is, what role can the local media play?
Yes, exactly, in a war like this.
Is it the local media in the United States or the local media in Cameroon?
The local media in Cameroon, I think.
Okay, well, let's talk about both of them because, again, I think that's a very interesting question. As far as the local media in Cameroon goes, I fear maybe the media has changed since I was there, but when I was there, the media's audience was fairly small, very focused, and people tended to read the journals that they agreed with, and the journals tended to write for their readers who agreed with them. So as we know that opinion is dramatically split in Cameroon, I'm not sure that the media can do that much beyond reporting objectively, using data, using their opinion pieces to try to educate all of the public on what's going on. But the interesting point you raise, which we really should talk about, is the media in the United States. Because the truth is, again, I like to deal in the truth, not in philosophies. The truth is that very few people in the United States are even aware of what's going on in Cameroon. Now, of course, we have the Cameroonian diaspora for whom this is a life and death issue. And this is the major thing they focus on. But your average American would find it hard to even locate Cameroon on a map. So they know almost nothing about what's going on in Cameroon. And that is where the Cameroonian diaspora could help tremendously by writing letters to the editor of American newspapers, of writing opinion pieces, of educating the American public of what's going on in Cameroon, and also using their political strength to educate members of Congress. Now, I find select members of Congress, and especially the staff of members of Congress, to be very interested in what's going on in Cameroon. As a matter of fact, I had some conversations yesterday with certain staff members of Congress. And, to again, try to focus on the issue. But to get the United States moving in a certain direction requires mobilizing the American public. And to mobilize the American public, they need to be educated and informed. So instead of Cameroonians talking to each other about the issue, it would be much, much more positive to be talking about the general American audience on this.
Thank you, Ambassador Tibor Nagy. We have another question coming in because, of course, after this first part, we are going to move to the second part of the program, which will focus on the BR regime. And, of course, you can also send in your questions. But for now, let me give this question coming in from Hubert. Please, when you send a question, make sure that you send your name. All questions are welcomed. Greetings to you in the studio. Please help me ask the ambassador why the United States is reluctant in intervening in the current problem in the southern Cameroon, by Hubert.
Well, we talked about that before. You can define intervening in so many different ways. If you define intervening as raising alarm and raising concerns by members of the U.S. government over the human rights violations that are going on in Cameroon, then that type of intervention has been going on ever since the problem started. By intervention, if you're talking about, the other extreme would be putting American soldiers on a plane and landing in Buea and Bamenda and Limbe, then that is never going to happen. So the action has to come someplace in between, which means taking a more active role in places like the United Nations, taking a more active role with our like-minded thinking group. You're talking about United Kingdom, you're talking about Canada, you're talking about the European Union, you're talking about Germany, places like that. Then I agree with you. I feel like the United States could be a lot more active.
This question coming in from Song Derek. Ambassador Tibor Nagy, why can't the United States stop speech making into swift action? How many more people have died more in Africa than in Ukraine? Yet the world is blind. Is there some racism detected here? Coming in from Song Derek.
Yeah, absolutely. In the scheme of things, and I have said this publicly also, from the point of view of the United States, when the United States looks at the world and looks at the various geopolitical regions of the world, Africa has historically been the lowest priority. That is the way it is, and I want to exemplify that somehow. Now, imagine that you have a basketball game where you're going to select players, and all the players are Olympic athletes. Someone will be picked last, even though they are an Olympic athlete. So it doesn't mean, that does not mean that Africa is not important. It's just that the United States, when it looks at the world, it looks at other regions and considers them more important. So that means it gives less attention to Africa, in my view, than it should. And I believe that that is going to change in the future, but so far it has not. So when it comes to African problems, historically, the United States has tended to look at others who are more involved in Africa than the United States to be the first people to address them. This means in a place like Cameroon that the United States would have looked first at the Europeans, because the Europeans were much more concerned with Africa than the United States was. Now, should it be that way? No, I disagree that it should be that way. I think the United States should be much more interested in Africa. But again, I believe in telling the truth and dealing with reality.
Ambassador Tibor Nagy, another question coming in from Elijah Nwaku. How will the United States still be supplying weapons to Cameroon, knowing very well that weapons donated to fight Boko Haram still find themselves in the northwest and southwest, killing innocent people? Coming in from Elijah.
Yeah, there I go back to what I talked about before. Now, the United States has an incredibly complicated and sophisticated monitoring mechanism to see the uses that military equipment is put to that is provided to other countries. And the instant that there's evidence that something has been used in a situation where there's human rights violations committed, that the training stops, the equipment stops. So that is looked at very seriously. Again, I can only talk about when I was a secretary. We followed the situation extremely closely, and as I said, we stopped certain programs with certain Cameroonian units as soon as we had evidence that they were involved in human rights violations in the northwest or southwest provinces. So that is something the United States takes very seriously, and I can't emphasize enough how incredibly interested certain members of Congress are to make sure that the United States does not allow its military equipment to be used in illegal ways.
For those who are just joining us, you're watching this special 90 Minutes in Africa interview with Ambassador Tibor Nagy, former Assistant Secretary of State, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs. Because it's coming in, we never really announced it due to some issues, but of course we want you to share to as many groups as possible and alert others so that they can watch in case they might have a question to ask His Excellency, because he, as you know, he has a very tight schedule. Good evening to you, Mr. Boh Elvis and His Excellency Tibor Nagy and Ponje. Mr. Tibor Nagy, the Cameroonian government has made repeated calls for the U.S. to help them capture separatist leaders in America. Is this a request which the United States government might consider granting in the near future?
Yeah, the United States policy on that type of thing is very, very clear. And even when I was a Assistant Secretary, I had several conversations with Cameroonian officials on this. The United States has laws. If somebody breaks an American law, then they get arrested. If they do not break an American law, then they do not get arrested. So, you know, what constitutes breaking a law? That's that's up to the law enforcement people. So just because someone is in opposition to a government certainly is not a criminal activity. Is it a criminal activity if they procure weapons and send weapons and things like that? Possibly it is. But again, it's looked at individually. Unlike in many countries, it is not looked at politically, because that's the heart of the question. Is if the Cameroonian government comes to the American government and says that these people are secessionists, so they should be arrested and returned, then the United States of America does not act on that based on any kind of political consideration. Not only the Cameroonian government, but I can assure you any number of other African governments have been very, very upset with the United States in how we allow opposition groups and opposition leaders and opposition members to conduct certain activities in the United States.
Okay, thank you. Of course, we'll be coming back. Let's get some few questions before we move to the second part of the program. Good day, Your Excellency. Does the United States see Ambazonian fighters as terrorists? Consider how that's how they are referred to by the Cameroon government. Does the United States see Ambazonia fighters as terrorists? My name is Tama in Douala.
Yeah, that's one of those eternally philosophical questions, isn't it? Because one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. How I remember that from the old Soviet days. Here's what the United States government, again, when I was in the government, we referred to the fighters in Ambazonia as secessionists. We did not call them freedom fighters. We did not call them terrorists. We called them secessionists. Now, let's distinguish between the people and the acts that are committed, because some of the acts we could say are acts of terrorism. We can say that they're horrific. We can say that they're human rights violations, but in no way have we labeled the people in Ambazonia as terrorists. Like I said, we have called the United States government, while I was there, we referred to them as secessionists.
Thank you, Excellency. We continue with the second part of the program by taking a look at the Biya regime. Since 1982, the United States has maintained satisfactory diplomatic relations with Cameroon under the stewardship of President Paul Biya at the political, economic, and social levels. What is the United States' appreciation of President Paul Biya's leadership so far? I mean, we'll begin with a positive appreciation.
Yeah, again, I'm not speaking for the United States government. You know, we have to keep underlining that because I'm not the assistant secretary now. But if you had asked me, you know, when I was assistant secretary, there were a couple of things. Cameroon achieved middle income status. Cameroon remained relatively stable. Cameroon participated in trying to combat extremism and terrorism in its northern borders. But the balance, then on the other opposite end of the scale, we have to put all of the negative things. So whether the scale balances towards the positive or the negative, I think you have to ask the academicians and you'll have to ask the historians that. Because as you well know, I have a long list of complaints against the current government.
Of course, let's ask another question now. What will you say are some of the action during President Paul Biya's leadership that might have made him lose points within diplomatic circles in the United States?
That might have what?
Make
what kind
him
of points?
To lose points at the...
well, do we have 3 hours?
Of course, just make a summary, just a brief summary.
Well, okay, yeah. Let's start with this. During time, there has been a history of corruption. There has been a history of misgovernance. There has been, on the one hand, President Biya allowed the creation and the formation of additional political parties. But on the other hand, some of the presidential elections, how can I say this diplomatically, have been deeply flawed. The economy could have probably grown much better without corruption if there had been a rule of law. Then we have to get to the issue at hand, the mishandling by the government of the problems in the Anglophone area. And instead of addressing them substantively, they have only been addressed symbolically. So I would say that would be one of the biggest complaints, is that what the government speaks is not often what the government actually does.
Your Excellency, a Facebook post made on the page of Kaibai Gatama, who is one of the leaders of the Mouvement 10 Millions de Nordistes, a movement that advocates for the rights of Cameroonians from the Grand Nord. This is what the post reads, quotation marks open. They tell me, the post was made 5 days ago on the page of Kaibai Gatama, one of the members of the Mouvement 10 Millions de Nordistes, which means movement of 10 million Northerners. That's for those from the Grand Nord. It reads, they tell me, that's quotation marks open, they tell me you have no one in the Grand North to take over from Paul Biya. I always answer them that we have 10 million Northerners to come back to power after Paul Biya. The democratic conquest of power is the only legitimate ambition that must mobilize our forces. Some are scared that alongside, that is quotation mark opens, so it ends with forces. The democratic conquest of power is only the legitimate ambition that must mobilize our forces, quotation marks close. Some are scared that alongside what is happening in the English speaking part of Cameroon, these statements coming in from movements like this, I'm talking about Mouvement 10 Millions de Nordistes, could be an indicator that things might get worse in the long run for Cameroon.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Obviously, countries like Cameroon have to decide, you know, within their own sovereignty, how they want to deal with these regional issues. Now, you know, it's interesting how Nigeria has approached it, that they have instituted an informal rotation of their presidency between the North and the South. And then you get into the issue of, okay, is it going to be just north-south, or is it going to be northeast, southwest, northwest, southeast type of rotation? But again, Cameroon, in many respects, is a mirror image, smaller, of Nigeria, with clearly split regions. And, we may get to the day where Cameroon really has to look at itself in the mirror and say, or do we need to introduce a type of a regional association as opposed to the unicameral state? And, we can talk to academicians and others as to what would be the ideal, but it comes down to being a practical political question that has to be solved by the leadership of the country.
Ambassador Tibor Nagy, as you know, just yesterday, the Speaker of Cameroon's National Assembly was elected. Yeah, he has been there for decades. I'm talking about Kavaye Jibril, and there was one opposition candidate who challenged him, Jean-Michel Niche, but he got only one vote, which means he voted for himself. So, how do you rate the opposition in Cameroon? Do you think the opposition in Cameroon is ready and organized enough to take over power democratically in Cameroon?
I don't know, honestly. Sometimes historical situations cause somebody to rise up and take charge of the situation. So that depends in every country on circumstances. We have seen a recent example of a leader that everyone thought was not up to the job. President Zelensky of Ukraine just stepped forward and is now admired by the entire world. So, you never know who can step forward. I remember the first multi-party election in Cameroon and how close John Furundi came to being elected, even though, if I remember at the time, he was not the best French speaker. But it's clear that millions and millions of Francophone Cameroonians had confidence in him and voted for him. So, you talk about the opposition, knowing as I do the high quality of Cameroonian statesmanship and, the incredible talents of so many of the political class in Cameroon, I personally think that, yes, there are many people who are quite capable of moving in and assuming leadership.
Your Excellency, if there is one thing you think President Paul Biya can do to write his name in stone in Cameroon, what do you think that should be?
Well, if I was his personal advisor, I would say, Mr. President, before your time is up in the presidency, you still have an opportunity to resolve this terrible, terrible situation going on in the Anglophone areas, and please do so, because you have been in power for 39 years. You have the experience, so please take care of that today, and history will look on you very, very kindly.
Ambassador Tibor Nagy, do you think it is time for an Anglophone president in Cameroon? Do you think that maybe having an Anglophone president could also be a solution to the ongoing war in the northwest and southwest of the country?
Well, again, it's not up for foreigners to dictate or make suggestions. All I can say is, you look at Canada, which is the absolute reverse of the situation in Cameroon, where you have 80% of the population which is Anglophone and 20% Francophone. And the Canadians have been quite comfortable with Francophone heads of state. So I personally don't see why there would be any reason why Francophones should be uncomfortable with an Anglophone head of state. As you also know, in Canada, they highly value both languages, so that it is impossible for any Canadian politician to not be totally fluent in both French and English. And I think if that type of situation existed in Cameroon, you would have a lot more trust towards all politicians by Cameroonians, whether they're Francophone or Anglophone.
And some are still sending the messages. Don't be surprised if at the end you discover that I come back to the issues in the English-speaking part of Cameroon, if I discover that there are some questions which have been asked, which we did not ask before. Those that are just joining us, you have the opportunity to send your questions to Ambassador Tibor Nagy on this exclusive interview coming to you from my Media Prime Television, the African Eye, a special edition of 90 Minutes in Africa. Ambassador, let me get back to you to talk about the opposition in Cameroon. When you take a look at the opposition, we have we have Nijon Fundi, we have, of course, he handed over the chairmanship of the party to Joshua Osi, we have Cabral Libi, we have Maurice Kamto, and so many other opposition parties in the country that keep being created day in, day out. Who do you see as charismatic enough to lead Cameroon from the opposition after Paul Biya?
That there is no way I would get into that situation. I'm not going to endorse anybody. I had a number of them come and see me when I was Assistant Secretary of State, and the only way I would take a picture with them is if they promised that they would not use it in their campaign material. So no, I won't touch that question.
Okay, thank you, Excellency. Let me take some messages just to indicate those who are watching online. Dark Up Destiny, he says, watching us from Facebook, he says, Cameroonians have to solve their problems among themselves and nobody else. That's coming from Dark Up Destiny. Mulu Edwin Teneng, Mr. Ambassador, when you were in power, you once said Cameroon can't be divided, that you don't want a third poor country again as Sudan, but just of recently your conversation changed. Why this? Only now, when you're in power, you were against Southern Cameroon, but now you are in between. Mr. Ambassador, where is your position? Adrian Mulung from Douala.
Yeah, that's a great question. Here's the deal, and I have said this before. The American Assistant Secretary of State can recommend policy and can implement policy, but at the end of the day, in the United States system, it is the president and the executive that makes policy. So, you know, if the policy of the United States of America is to support a unitary Cameroon, then that's the policy that the Assistant Secretary of State is going to promote and help implement. Now, we also have to look at the situation on the ground. The situation on the ground has changed considerably over the last couple of years because the Cameroonian government has failed to make any real substantial changes that would make the Anglophone Cameroonians more supportive of the type of system that they were recommending. So unfortunately, as the situation has deteriorated, my own thinking has also moved, and my personal belief very strongly is I can feel comfortably support whatever the majority of Anglophone Cameroonians support.
Your Excellency, this other question coming in, any particular message for those in the English-speaking part of Cameroon, especially the civilians? There are many of them, millions of them that are watching you right now. Some are sending in messages. I can't read all the messages because there are so many messages coming in via SMS, via WhatsApp. But any particular message, especially to the civilians?
Yeah, here's my message. If the Anglophone Cameroonians want the international community to be more serious in responding to the crisis, they really need to have a unified position. Right now, the way the international community looks at the situation is that the positions range really all over the place. So there's not the same kind of unity that is broadcast by Anglophone Cameroonians as there is by some other African causes. And again, I will point to the case of Somaliland. Somalilanders are absolutely unified in what they want and how they want to pursue it. And they present a totally unified position when they visit members of the US Congress or where they interact with members of the international community. As long as Anglophone Cameroonians do not project a unified position, then the response from the international community will be much weaker than it could be.
Ambassador Tibor Nagy, let's now get to a social question before we close the interview, because as you know, this is just part one of the interview. Based on the reactions, we will be getting back to you for more interviews on this issue, as well as some African affairs. Ambassador, from messages that are coming in, Cameroonians are telling me to ask you why the United States, or the West in general, wants Africa to practice homosexuality, same-sex, or lesbianism at a time when the United States is not ready to accept polygamy.
I love that question. That goes to the essence of everyone has their own culture. So I will say that question you should pose to the current American government, because I have my own views, just like, you know, everybody has their own views. And I love that. I'm so happy that we're closing on that. And as a matter of fact, I am going to take that very same argument the next time I have a discussion over that issue with somebody.
Exactly, because here in Cameroon, from what the people are telling me, I mean, polygamy, people should have the right to practice polygamy if they decide it to be so. And so at the same time, too, the United States should not impose homosexuality on Cameroon.
I want to thank, I want to thank whoever posed that question. You know, that is absolutely the point of view that I appreciate.
Ambassador Tibor Nagy, your last word before we have just 2 minutes to end the interview. Of course, we know that sometimes sweet things do not last for long. Your last word before we end this interview, Your Excellency.
Yeah, here's my last word. Do not count on the international community, but have a unified position and decide what Anglophone Cameroonians want for their successful, prosperous future.
Ladies and gentlemen, viewers of My Media Prime, we are hoping to have Your Excellency again. He has promised us that he'll be back for us to talk Cameroon and talk Africa in another exclusive interview on My Media Prime. That was a special edition of 90 Minutes in Africa. Of course, if you discover that there were some questions I didn't ask from whatever angle, just contact me and I'm going to organize another show with His Excellency Tibor Nagy for us to host, for him to answer some questions that you think we didn't answer. That was 90 Minutes in Africa special edition, coordinated by Kumulionet, produced by Eli Nolinga, broadcast by Joel Tamnjong. Want to thank the entire My Media Prime technical team, the human resource, as well as the broadcast team for programming. This special interview was coordinated by Kumulionet, supervised by Brian Tambe, and our special guest was Tibor Nagy, former Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs. I am Boh Elvis. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.